Once upon a time.
For the third installment in this year's story song series, I'm going to do a very different song. I'm going to do a funny song. I apologize. It seems like so many of the good story songs are sad songs. This one is just kind of silly, really, but it is a neat little song, and some of you might enjoy it. First time I ever heard the song when I was still a teenager. My older brother Steve got married, and he and his wife Kim, they moved into a rental home in the Martins Creek area, just above a friend of ours, really great man, great auto mechanic, Troy Phillips. He and my dad started a service station together back in the 60s. And anyway, they were renting that home there, and they hired me to mow their yard. So I mowed it a few times, and went in maybe just to get a drink or something. Anyway, they knew that I was all about old country music at that time, and so Steve's wife Kim, she had a record, a 33 record. It might have actually been a collection of records, but it was live performances on the Grand Ole Opry. So they let me borrow that, and I heard this song on there, and some great songs from like Hank Locklin. I remember Kim's favorite song on there was How Far Is Heaven, which was Kitty Wells singing. There was Hank Snow on there, a lot of good acts. When I heard this song and I heard this group, and it's a duet, and of course you all know that's my favorite type of singing, is a duet, close harmony duet. I did like them. I liked them a lot more later when I heard them especially in live performances. This recording I thought was a pretty buttoned up performance, and now that could have been just because there's so many words in the song that you kind of have to keep everything buttoned up and lean a little bit more to the, I want to say robotic side of things, but there's not a lot of room for expression in this song just because of the amount of words and the tricky way that those words fall in there. This is a song that I recommend if you try singing this song, you make sure you've got a good 8 hours of sleep. Maybe take some supplements too, so your brain can be fully firing, so to speak. This group, I heard about them again in a couple of different books that I read about the Louvin brothers. And if you're familiar with the Louvin brothers and their history, then you know that they had to audition quite a few times before they were ever accepted onto the Grand Ole Opry, which is really kind of ridiculous, because they're about as good as it gets in any form of music. Charlie commented that was mostly kind of getting past one particular individual who was standing in their way. Now, there's a really good podcast that the son of David Allan Coe does, and the name of the podcast, believe it or not, is, I think it's Cocaine and Rhinestones. And there's a long episode about the Louvin brothers, and in that episode, the guy who is doing the podcast, and I'm sure he really knows his stuff, he's very skeptical of that and doesn't really believe that one guy who was really just kind of a stage manager could have really interfered with them that much or been in their way, so to speak, that much. But I tend to lean toward what Charlie said and what his recollections were. Obviously, he was there. He lived it firsthand. So I think he was in a better position to judge that than any of us, but living today. But anyway, in several of those books, when Charlie and Ira would go to audition for the Opry, they would borrow the mandolin and guitar of this particular group. Now, it never said so in the book, but I'm going to assume the reason they were doing that might have been that Charlie and Ira at the time were not members of the union, the musicians union there in Nashville. There's nothing that indicates that, but I don't know why else they wouldn't just use their own instruments. But each time they would go audition, they would borrow the mandolin and the guitar from these two gentlemen, who I will name eventually, I promise. But I have read maybe George Jones and some different acts like that the first time they performed on the Opry, because they were not members of the union, they were not allowed to hold an instrument. And I think somebody, Porter Wagner, somebody like that, could see that George Jones was so nervous and he really needed sort of the safety of something to hold in his hands that he let him play his guitar, even though that was really not supposed to happen. And I'm definitely not trying to make the music unions sound like bad guys. Those musicians, I feel like, need someone standing up for their rights, because the amazing musicians that lay down those tracks in those studios, they don't get rich and famous like the front man or the front performer does. There's some exceptions, like Glenn Campbell started as a studio musician and eventually broke through and became a huge star in his own right, but most of them, you don't even know their names. So I'm not trying to knock the unions. But anyway, I thought it was interesting that these guys loaned those instruments to the Louvin Brothers each time that they auditioned. And of course, they eventually did get on the Opry. I saw that no one really, I couldn't really find anybody much besides these guys who ever recorded this song, other than Willie Nelson recorded this song right around the year 2000, somewhere in there. He had an album called Rainbow Connection or something like that, and he put this song on there. I think that's interesting. He kept it really stripped down. It's mostly just Willie and a guitar, and then kind of like an informal group that sings with him on the chorus. It doesn't sound like polished backup singers at all. In fact, I even wonder if it might be, if you've ever seen those family circle groups that get together with all the sort of retired country musicians, and they sit around and sing their old hits. I even wondered if it might have been that group, because it just sounds like a big group of people in the room singing together with him on the chorus. But I thought it was really interesting that Willie recorded it, because a lot of those classic videos, when you first started to be able to see those and have access to those, either on VHS, DVD, or through the RFD channel, it seemed like Willie had facilitated that. He had something called Act 4 Media or something like that, where he had bought the rights to those old videos so that people could go back and see them, because it's fantastic stuff. And I think Willie Nelson, I've never seen him live, I've never spoken to him, but I know that he has tremendous respect for all those classic country acts. I've heard him talk about how he really loved how everybody was so distinct. No two singers sounded alike. Everybody was very different from each other. And I've heard him comment about the comedy acts, how much he enjoyed the comedy acts. And of course, this group is a comedy act, or was a comedy act. And I've heard Willie say that he loved that on those old videos and those old Opry shows, you had such diversity in the musical acts. You had such an array or palette. You had bluegrass right there beside cowboy music, and sort of everything else too. You had quartets, you had more blues kind of music, you had gospel music, you just had it all. And all that, unfortunately, has really been lost in modern country music, and there's almost no variety. But anyway, I thought it was a neat little tip of the hat from Willie that he recorded this song. These guys didn't write the song. I'll put the writers of the song in the notes down below. But of course, the group I'm talking about is Lonzo and Oscar, a great comedy act. And they had Cousin Jody and different people like that joined in with them in their live performances. When I go back and watch those old Opry videos, I feel like if Lonzo and Oscar are on the show, they steal the show. No matter who else is on there, they just always hit it out of the park. And the little guy, I guess Lonzo was his name, he could take that A model mandolin, what my dad would call a pumpkin seed mandolin, which is not a big mandolin, and he could just make it sound, just huge. Make it sound like he was playing through an amplifier. But it was just something about his lick and the way he played it. This would be one subtle way he could accomplish that. A lot of times he would hold the mandolin out away from his body. And so if this instrument's pressed up against my body, then my body's going to absorb some of the vibration. But if I can hold it out like this, it's actually going to be louder, because none of the vibration of the instrument is going to be dampened by my body. He may have also had a thick pick. But just a fantastic mandolin player. I think those guys were actually really good harmony singers. I don't know if they ever made any serious recordings. I'm going to look here later, and I would be stoked if I found them singing any serious love songs or gospel songs, but I always enjoyed their comedic songs. You almost can't think of Lonzo and Oscar without also thinking of Homer and Jethro. Those are two different groups. Homer and Jethro, also immensely talented singers, and Jethro Burns, just a top-notch mandolin player. Played a lot with Chet Atkins, people like that. They kind of go together, but they also had their unique style. These two different groups, Lonzo and Oscar, and Homer and Jethro. Lonzo and Oscar did a lot of bending of their notes as they sang, and then of course Cousin Jody on that dobro or steel guitar would come up with some of the craziest note bends and craziest sounds anyone has ever heard. I heard Steve Wariner say that actually Cousin Jody played the dobro on all of Acuff's original recordings. Most people tend to think that was Oswald, but he came just a little bit later, and it was actually Cousin Jody. So we know that Cousin Jody could play serious music too. Anyway, I will shut up and try to give this song a go, and I'll be lucky to make it through it. Just so many words. Here we go. The song is I'm My Own Grandpa, which was released by Lonzo and Oscar in 1947 on RCA. It sounds funny, I know, but it really is so. Oh, I'm my own grandpa. Now many years ago, when I was 23, I was married to a widow who was pretty as could be. This widow had a grown-up daughter who had hair of red. My father fell in love with her, and soon they two were wed. This made my dad my son-in-law and changed my very life. My daughter was my mother, for she was my father's wife. To complicate the matter, even though it brought me joy, I soon became the father of a bouncing baby boy. This baby then became a brother-in-law to Dad, and so became my uncle, though it made me very sad. For if he was my uncle, then that also made him brother of the widow's grown-up daughter, who of course is my stepmother. I'm my own grandpa. I'm my own grandpa. It sounds funny, I know, yet it really is so. Oh, I'm my own grandpa. Father's wife then had a son who kept him on the run, and he became my grandchild, for he was my daughter's son. My wife is now my mother's mother, and it makes me blue as husband of, because although she is my wife, she's my grandmother too. Now if my wife is my grandmother, then I'm her grandchild, and every time I think of that, it nearly drives me wild. For now I have become the strangest case you ever saw.